to our Dead Hour dialogue. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, welcome everybody. This is the Department of History's Dead Hour dialogue, the first of our spring semester. We are talking about identity, contested boundaries, and the legacy of the Cold War in the Ukraine. The purpose of this Dead Hour dialogue is to facilitate inquiry and dialogue about contemporary events. And so I would like to introduce our three panelists to the audience today. It's Dr. Troy Chatterjee, Dr. Chris Endy, and Dr. Tim Painich. We're going to go ahead and start with Dr. Tim Painich, who's going to give us a brief history of the Ukraine up until 1991. Then we're going to move into hear from Dr. Troy Chatterjee about the Soviet Union and that legacy. Then we're going to end with Chris Endy and a discussion really of just foreign policy, diplomacy, what happens kind of next. We are going to save space for questions at the end of our dialogue. We have scheduled this dialogue from 3 to 4. If we go over 4 p.m., that's fine. Let's just get involved and have a great discussion. So once again, welcome to the History Department's Dead Hour dialogue. I will turn this over to Tim Painich, okay, as our first panelist. Let her in. Tim, are you with us? Can you hear me? Okay, Tim might be having some technical issues and everything. As we wait, go ahead and introduce yourself and chat for me, please. And let's get some of the dialogue going. What do we think is going on in the Ukraine right now? What are some of your thoughts, some of your impressions as we are waiting for Tim to get back into our Zoom session? Go ahead and put your answers in chat for me, okay? And we'll start very shortly. Okay.
Oh, Tim just,
Tim's in?
I think.
Yep. Okay. We're almost ready. Thanks, you guys. We've had some tech issues today. We don't know if someone tapped in or not. We don't know. But we did notice some, slowness with our Zoom. So thank you for being patient with us as we start this out. Is Tim in the room? Do we see Tim? Hi, Nathan. Hi, Justin. How are you guys? Hi, Dr. Yao.
Good, thank you.
All right, so go ahead and introduce yourself in chat while we're waiting, okay? Although this is a Dead Hour dialogue, let's do a little interaction in chat as we get organized and wait for Tim to come on in. Hi, Andrea, it's nice to see you again.
Hi, nice to be here.
Thank you, guys. Hi, Diana. Thank you, Susanna, for attending. Okay, all right, so we're waiting for Tim to get caught in, brought into our Zoom session. Let's go ahead and introduce Chris Endy. Chris Endy is going to start us off with just an overview of the Ukrainian crisis, the Soviet Union, and just history in general. Thank you, Nathan, for listening to me when I asked people to introduce themselves in chat. I appreciate that.
I think Tim is here.
Here?
Tim
Okay.
Painich. Tim, are you here?
I think he is.
I am.
Yes. Okay.
Excellent.
Woo. Thank you. Yes, and on camera. I'm so excited.
I was running.
No, all right, Tim, I will do your PowerPoint for you. And you, of course, have the floor.
You don't have to do that. No, I got it now.
Okay.
Yeah, I got it.
Thank you, John. Okay, we're just having a meet and greet real fast while we were waiting.
Oh, yeah, good.
I love it. Hi,
Do I need to share? Do I share with you?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead and share. Okay,
All right,
we got a
there it
good sized crowd. I'm so glad you guys came. Hi, Cliff. Hi, Megan. Nice to see you. Hi, Tyler. Thank you. Hi, Peter. Thanks, everybody, for showing up to support this Dead Hour dialogue. Hi, Viviana. Hey, my student. Hi, Daniel. Nice to see you. All right, here we go, you guys.
All right. Thanks for coming, everyone. Sorry about my delay. But I'll be covering Ukrainian national identity from its, very beginnings, if that's possible. I'll try anyway to start at the beginning. But of course, you've been following what's going on with Vladimir Putin's declaration of war on Ukraine. And there's an historical aspect to this Russian attack on the Ukraine you might be aware of. He wrote an article about 6 months ago. Actually, no, it was July. Sorry, it was July. It was called On the Historical Unity of Russians and Ukrainians. And he repeated many of his talking points, the major points from that article in his speech. And maybe you followed it. He said that Ukraine does not have a separate identity from Russia. He said that, therefore, Ukraine has no right to exist as a separate nation. It's not a legitimate nation, he said, but rather an artificial type of creation. And he blamed it on one particular government of Russia. He blamed it on the communist government of the Bolsheviks. He said that the Bolsheviks created Ukraine, and that this was after the Bolshevik Revolution and the Civil War. Modern-day Ukraine was a gift from the Bolsheviks, and it was a mistake. So he allowed Lenin in the revolution. He allowed national groups a measure of independence, and therefore he set up the USSR for collapse. And what's more, the independence of Ukraine is seen then as a direct threat to Russia's identity. So I'll try to explain what this means in the next few minutes. But first we have to go back to many centuries ago, the beginnings of what was known as Kievan Rus. And Kievan Rus was a number of autonomous principalities governed from the city of Kiev. And Kiev was a governmental center religion there founded by this individual, Saint Volodymyr, as he's known in Ukrainian, or Vladimir in Russian. So he introduced Christianity to the people there. He introduced Byzantine forms of government and culture. And so this is very important because there's been some dispute about what this means. The Russians say that this was the beginning of their particular empire, that a direct lineage can be drawn between this founding and that of Muscovy, or the future capital of the Russian Empire. Whereas the Ukrainians say it was the Russians who grew out of us. And so there's a dispute, a very important dispute on origins here. The Russians have taken the initiative and have built their own monument to Saint Vladimir, not Vladimir, the Ukrainian version. Vladimir is a very popular name in Russia and East Slavic countries. You might know, of course, Putin's first name is Vladimir. Vladimir Lenin was another famous Vladimir. And of course, the current president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. So the Russians are trying to hijack this national discourse, this historical discourse. So we'll talk about some issues in the formation of the modern state of Ukraine. We can point to its beginning sometime around the 17th and 18th century in kind of a nebulous form with the establishment of hetmanates. These were military kingdoms organized by groups known as Cossacks. Cossacks were freebooting warriors. They served as frontier guards for the Poles, kind of caught up in between expanding empires, the Polish Empire, the Tatars, who were vassals to the Ottoman Sultanate to the south, and to the growing Russian Empire, which was expanding to the west. So these military kingdoms were governed by a type of indigenous freebooter group, a type of peasant nobility, you might say. If that's a bit of a misnomer, I apologize. But what they did was to protect the Poles until they rebelled. And they found themselves caught in battles between the Polish, here you can see, according to this map, this large kingdom, and the growing Russian Empire. And the dispute with the Poles led them to sign an alliance with the Russian Empire. And it was supposed to be kind of a 50-50 alliance, more or less. It was supposed to be one where both leaders, the Russian Tsar and the Hetman, the military leader of the Cossacks, would be able to associate with each other on an equal basis. But very quickly, it became a one-sided affair with the Russians dominating. And soon the Ukrainians, these early Ukrainians, lost their independence. This is interesting in a greater historical dimension because of the way that it's been portrayed in propaganda discourse by both sides. But here in particular, you see a Russian stamp that was issued in 1954, the 300th anniversary of this famous treaty. And it's titled The Reunification of Ukraine and Russia, as if this was some type of bringing the two brother Slavs, the two tribes back together again for a reunion tour. But you can see by the positioning, by the postures, that the Russian is clearly the leading individual here, and the Ukrainian is accepting a subservient place. So basically what this is saying is that going all the way back to Kievan Rus, it was the Russians who were accepting the Ukrainians as their little brothers into their bosom. So all of them were Russians, including Ukrainians. And the political situation developed with the further expansion of Russia, the major reformer, Tsar Peter the Great, who tried to co-opt some of these Cossacks as soldiers in his various expansionist plans. One, however, rebelled, the famous hetman Ivan Mazepa, and he was defeated and driven into exile. He joined the Swedes in a battle against the Russians and lost. So he paid the price, not just losing his armies, but also causing his people to fall into a more firm grip of the Russians. By the way, Mazepa was anathematized by the Russian Orthodox Church, and his name was read, demonized in the actual rituals of the church for a couple centuries after this. The expansion of Russia continued, and a partition of Poland occurred. Part of it went to the Habsburg Empire, this Western area, and which developed at a different pace and according to different culture than the rest of the Ukrainian people and their national aspirations. With the expansion of Catherine the Great, she actually managed to take over territorially the Cossack hetmanate, and also acquired territory from the Crimean Tatars, who were vassals again of the Ottomans. So taking over Crimea and very fertile territory, which she populated with settlers from Germany, from Jewish lands to the west, and other minorities, and finally including Ukrainians. You can see here, these are the outlines of modern day Ukraine. Of course, not including Crimea. This map was made a little bit earlier. So in the 19th century, this is really the important period of national consciousness among Ukrainians. Like many other nations, the springtime of peoples, as it was called in the early 1800s, a national consciousness swept through Europe, and especially among Ukrainians who developed their language with the help of bards like Taras Shevchenko, Ukrainian national poet. And after a few years, the Russians became, the Russian authorities, the Tsarist authorities became very upset about this. They became fearful of Ukraine establishing its own autonomy within the bosom of the Russian Empire. And so they started to crack down on the use of Ukrainian language. It could no longer be taught in schools. Publications in Ukrainian were basically outlawed. And so this spawned an underground movement, a Ukrainian nationalist movement. This is kind of the tension that you see between these two nationalities, these two ethnicities. Of course, the Russians were able to establish a modern version of their nationalism first, but they strove to minimize and maybe outright exterminate the Ukrainian nationality. The ethnic map of Russia here, you can see Ukrainians, Belarusians. It's interesting too, because Belarusians were considered another brothers Slavic people that was closely bound to Kievan Rus from the very beginning, and that were to be, again, within the bosom of Russian nationalism, Russian imperialism as it grew. But there was a fear that if some of these nations managed their nationalist aspirations successfully, then many others would rebel too. And of course, this was a concern among many other empires, the Habsburg, Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Russian Empire, the Ottoman Empire. So the problems within the Russian Empire came to a head in 1917 with the outbreak of revolution. And in the first phase of the revolution, the Ukrainians were able to establish their independence and did manage to create the first modern Ukrainian nation, although it was very short-lived. And again, the vicissitudes of war and revolution and civil war within Russia led to the very rapid absorption of Ukraine. And how this happened is a very complicated affair. Again, part of Ukraine had been cut off and part of the Habsburg, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And so those Ukrainians aspired to their own independent republic as well. But however, Poland claimed that territory from them. And so Ukrainians on both sides of this divide were trying to work together, but found it very difficult to realize their nationalist aspirations. The Soviets, the Bolsheviks, were able to send their Red forces to defeat the independent Ukrainians. It was also complicated by the fact that Germans had overthrown the Ukrainian government and established a puppet government. They were there until late 1918, when the Bolsheviks were able to move in and fill this vacuum. So I will not making this too complicated, and I will try to wrap things up soon. But when we get to the Soviet Union, we have to consider that the nationalist policies of its first two leaders, Vladimir Lenin and Joseph Stalin, called for a specific type of organization of this new government. Now, Russia would be, of course, the largest territorially and in terms of population, but other areas would be incorporated as well, and at least in theory, on an equal basis, 15 of them in all. And of course, Ukraine was one of them. Ukraine and Georgia were seen by Lenin and Stalin with particular caution. And these areas had the most well-developed nationalist independence movements. During the Civil War, they managed to establish their own independent nations briefly before the Bolsheviks managed to come in. And so to offer them kind of a carrot as well as a stick, a special type of arrangement was made, a policy known as korenizatsiya, or indigenization, okay? Indigenization. And the idea was to promote local ethnic cadres within the Communist Party, also to support in a limited way the use of national languages, of different types of culture. Another important aspect was simply to contrast, to juxtapose itself with what had happened before under the czars. So to offer that type of freedom, at least relatively speaking. And finally, in the Ukraine, this became known, I say the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, became known as Ukrainization or Ukrainization. So this was a kind of a golden age in the 1920s until the early 1930s for Ukrainian nationalism. There was a flourishing of publications of poetry and literature. Ukrainian films were made in a studio in Kiev, and so forth. But just around the corner was Stalin's Great Turn, the industrialization and collectivization program to modernize Russia. It's interesting to look at this particular poster here. It shows Donbass, this key area, which had already been developed somewhat under the Tsars for industrialization, as the heart of Russia. Now, technically, most of it was part of Ukraine, the new nation of Ukraine. But this type of nationalism among Russians was already kind of bleeding out. There were a lot of Russians that did come to this area, sometimes involuntarily, but mostly voluntarily, to work in mines and factories on these types of major construction projects. So this area became primarily ethnic Russian in orientation, at least temporarily. Now, along with the industrialization, the Soviet collectivization of agriculture took place. If you don't know about it, the idea was to extract grain from the countryside, from peasants, as a way of selling it abroad to gain funds for the industrialization program. And this was done in a very strident, quite often fanatical way, just by taking grain in a very haphazard way from peasants. And it, under conditions of a bad harvest in 1932-33, led to a massive famine in these areas of the country, in the Volga region, the North Caucasus, Kazakhstan, and the worst hit area was Ukraine. Altogether, between 3 and 3.5 million Ukrainians died. And definitely this was a man-made disaster. When Stalin found out that a famine was occurring, he blamed it on the Ukrainian peasantry and intelligentsia. He said that they were against Soviet power, that they were being stubborn, and they were trying to use this as in a nationalist type of campaign. And so it just made things worse. And the horrors of this Holodomor, as it's called, death by hunger, are plainly obvious to see. Another horror was the German invasion soon to come. This was the Great Patriotic War, and Ukraine suffered most of all of Soviet areas. The Battle of Kiev, which occurred from August to September 1941, where the Red Army lost hundreds of thousands of troops killed and captured, a disastrous campaign. Here on the left, you see a picture of armed militia made up of factory workers, white-collar workers, students who volunteered to go out to the outskirts of the city to fight the incoming Germans. This happened in most major Soviet cities with the German onslaught. And maybe you can see some similarities to what's happening now in Ukraine. During the war, there was a flowering of Ukrainian nationalism. Just before the war, with the Soviet non-aggression treaty, Ukraine had received some territory, captured territory from Eastern Poland, from Romania, and were able to incorporate it. They lost it with the German invasion, of course, but then with the reconquest of the Soviet Union, it was given back to Ukraine. And so here you see a painting from the time of Nikita Khrushchev, who was the party boss of Ukraine. Stalin is making his presence felt. Khrushchev was not Ukrainian, but he grew up there and worked in the Donbass. Later became a Communist Party official and advanced. In the war, a special type of an award was given to Ukrainians who fought valiantly. It was called the Order of Bohdan Khmelnytsky, beg your pardon. And this was an award given to Ukrainian soldiers for heroism. During this time, for the first time, the Ukrainians were called a great people. Formerly, that appellation was only given to the Russians, but very quickly after the war, it was withdrawn, as well as this award.
Dr. Painich, I just wanted to make sure that we had enough time to get to Choi and Dr. Endy's presentation too.
All right, I'll just finish up right now then.
All right, cool, thank you.
Thanks for the reminder, sorry.
No, it's okay, no, this is great. I just wanted to make sure I got my chair involved and Endy, Dr. Endy too, so.
You bet, I came in kind of late, so yeah, it's only fair.
Okay. Oh, wait, he's muted. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Tim.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I didn't know I was muted.
It's
Okay, sorry,
okay.
thanks. Okay, so an organization of guerrillas who were fighting on the side of the Germans and also for Ukrainian independence in the Polish lands, led by this man, Stepan Bandera, were successful and actually carried out a guerrilla war against the Soviets even after World War II was over. His name, Bandera, is now being associated by Putin with any type of Ukrainian nationalism. And so this is obviously a propaganda trick, trying to pick out just the smallest group of the Ukrainian nationalists as a symbol for the rest. I can see somebody just turned on the volume in the room next door. I suppose it might be the time to finish now,
It's
but
probably a
I'll let
surprise
Choi take
attack.
it up.
It
If
is.
you would, Choi, I'll just
Thank
finish
you.
with this
Thank
in
you.
saying that Putin's plan is a misreading of history. He has not talked about the important elements of Ukrainian nationalism that's developed. He's saying that Ukraine is always and always should be, always will be part of Russia. And that's the major incentive for what's going on today. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Dr. Painix, for this. I want to introduce Dr. Choi Chatterjee to continue this dialogue. So welcome. Did you want me to help you, Dr. Chatterjee, with your PowerPoint?
Don, that'll be so great if you can
Okay.
show it.
I
And-
shall. Let me go ahead and just bring it right up for you. Okay.
Oh, I see Justin. I see so many
No.
students. So good to see you. And Tim, that was fantastic. I got the primer I needed for Ukrainian history. I want to thank Don for organizing
Oh,
this.
you're
Don
welcome.
is so invaluable.
Thank you.
And
Okay.
okay. I want to thank all of you for being here. And this is a very stressful time for everybody. I'm getting emails from all my Russian friends who are so against the war. And I'm so worried for them because they're writing so openly on email. And I keep telling them, aren't y'all afraid? No one seems to be afraid. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I wanted to show you this picture. This is from Goa in India today. The Russians and the Ukrainians who come there, there were 90,000 visitors last year. They had a little parade with the local Indians, and you see that the colors. So this has become a global war in so many ways. And I think as many Russians are against it as are the Ukrainians. If we can go to the next slide, please, Dawn. I love maps. I'm so glad that Tim showed all these great maps. But I want you to pay attention that why this is a global conflict. This is not just about Russia and Ukraine. This is really about a reorganization of world politics. And it's very important to see where Ukraine is located and where Ukraine is really Russia's link to many different parts of the world. And so it's also geopolitically very important. If we can go to the next slide, and I'm speeding up a little because I want Dr. ND to speak as well. So the main thing that happened in 1991, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the republics broke away. Some in Central Asia are still very close to Russia. The Baltics can't stand the Russians. The Ukrainians have been doing a dance, not a very successful dance, but one thing that Russia wants is respect, and they want a desire for secure borders, which means they do not want expansion of NATO until their borders. And that has been something that they have been saying consistently. And that has been something that they've been doing consistently, is destabilizing the countries that surround Russia. As they say, they're doing it in self-defense, but that is not always what it looks like, especially when Putin is now bombing civilian centers in Kiev, in Kharkiv. Kherson just fell. This doesn't look just a desire for secure borders. Now, the collapse of the Soviet Union was seen as a tragedy by many in Russia, even the people who are against Putin. Many people believe that at some point the empire will be resurrected. I think the difference is the use of force. I don't think anybody wants it to be resurrected on the basis of force. Now, Putin has, as Tim told you, has been talking about the Union of Slavic Peoples. And this is something, he's borrowing a little bit from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the great writer who also talked about the Union of Slavic Peoples. And he meant, of course, Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia. But Solzhenitsyn would never agree with what Putin is doing right now by force. So why is Ukraine so important? Firstly, it's an economic powerhouse, which has never actually managed to become a powerhouse in and of itself. And that has to do also with incredible corruption in Ukraine. They have coal, they have iron, they have one of the biggest deposits of natural gas, which have never been explored, which actually rival some of the holdings of Russia and Norway. And more recently, lithium has been found in Ukraine. And I think most of you know that lithium is one of the key minerals that are used for making electric batteries. So the new revolution that we are seeing, that cars are moving from being powered by gas and oil to being powered by electric batteries, lithium is the key mineral. The three sources of lithium are China, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Ukraine. And several mining companies, including a very big one from China, are trying to get access to the mine. So Ukraine is more about just brotherhood. Putin knows that whoever controls Ukraine will control the electric car revolution of the future. The other thing about Ukraine is, of course, it's a strategic corridor, right? So Ukraine connects Russia with Turkey, through Turkey to Middle East, to West Asia. On the west, Ukraine connects to Europe. And then through Turkey also, they have access to the Mediterranean world and the North African world. So to know the map is really to understand this conflict. In 2014, Putin encouraged these two areas of the Donbass, where historically a lot of Russian speakers live. And here, it was interesting. They wanted to separate from Ukraine, but the people who are being polled there are saying, we did not agree to war on Ukraine. So even the ones who want to be independent are saying this war is a very bad idea. Putin took back Crimea in 2014, claiming historically this had been a part of Russia since the 18th century. This also goes back to Russia being colonized by Asia, which is another different story. But in 2014, Putin had huge support for taking Crimea back, including the people on the ground, the Russians and some Tatars who agreed to this annexation. Okay, can you go to the next slide? And I'm almost done here. So what are Putin's strengths and weaknesses? So his number one strength, and I would say the world's failure to resolve the crisis prior to the invasion, right? So we had a lot of time. Putin has been completely open about what he's going to do. The massing of the forces, I just watched in horror as nobody did anything. And of course, Putin was egged on, we think, by China. He was the only head of state who showed up at the Olympics in Beijing. And a joint statement was put out by saying that the Russo-Chinese friendship is so deep and so wide. It seems from what is coming out of China now that they are not very happy with the way the war is going. The second thing is to keep in mind is Putin came out of the Secret Service. He was a member of the FSB. He thinks like a Secret Service agent. He's not a military strategist, which might be one of the reasons why this war is going so badly in Ukraine. The war was supposed to be over 6 days ago. The Ukrainians were supposed to lay down their arms and run away in fright. The fact that it's going so badly tells me that this was planned as, and Putin insists that we call it an operation and not an invasion. And so Echo Moskvy, a very liberal Russian radio, was basically silenced for calling it war. He insists that we call it a military operation. What Putin learned from Chechnya, the two Chechen wars, Georgia, where they took away 2 territories, the annexation of Crimea, the separatist eastern provinces of Ukraine, and the bombing of Aleppo and Syria, was that limited use of force works really well. As I say, I don't think the same is true of what's happening now, which is why this Russians are coming home in body bags. Maybe up to 4,000 Russian soldiers have died in this conflict. We have reports of Russians turning over their tanks. Some very young conscripts have been sent to this war in Kiev because I think Putin wasn't expecting it to be a war. In terms of public opinion, there's a generational and class divide. Overwhelmingly educated Russians have said no to the war, including some oligarchs, some of the billionaires. We know that the head of the foreign ministry sent out a tweet saying that I'm a career diplomat, I'm not a propagandist. Today, the School of Moscow International Relations, where Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, graduated from, just put out a statement saying this war is wrong. And basically, Lavrov, you're an idiot, even though they didn't say it, they're more polite than I am. But we have seen that there are some older Soviet, the Savok, as they were called, who have supported Putin and think that Russia should be a great power again. These were the things that Putin did not expect, and that is quite clear. Ukrainian nationalism, right? Because Putin only talks to people he likes and they tell him there is no Ukrainian nationalism. No one expected Ukraine to fight back so ferociously. And it's not just a sophisticated military response. The Ukrainian army has been trained by the West since 2014. They've been sent, from Stinger missiles to all kinds of sophisticated military equipment. They have access to intel from the Pentagon, even though we are technically not fighting on their side. And the other thing is, this is a social media war as well, maybe the first social media war in history. The Ukrainians are winning it hands down, and there are an army of global hackers who are also helping the Ukrainians. These were Putin's weaknesses. And Dr. Andy will talk about Germany, so I won't go into detail. No one expected Germany, who has been extremely friendly with Putin and with Xi Jinping, to unexpectedly take such a strong stance. From Monday, they said they'd do nothing. By Friday, they had cut off oil and natural gas exports and joined in the economic sanctions. So that Putin wasn't expecting. Turkey closed the straits, the Bosphorus and the Black Sea, so the Russian ships can't go in there. And China had a conversation today with the foreign minister of Ukraine. China has a lot of investment in Ukraine, which they probably don't want to lose. But on the other hand, if Putin can reroute his oil and gas to China, he doesn't need the West. Then it really would be game over. So I think China is going to be the real country to watch in this. And finally, he's a dangerous man with a very powerful army. If we isolate and shame him, the expression, the cornered rat will bite, there has to be a face-saving solution in which the Russians can come up with peace and honor, because Putin is not going to go down without a fight. And so I'm hoping that some third-party intervention, hopefully China will be able to bring about some kind of end to the bombing, number one, the most important, and then we can work out the peace details later. Okay, Dr. Andy, all yours.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Choi. And thank you, Dawn, for putting all this together. Thank you, Tim, for that great background and explanation, really rebuttal to the idea that Ukraine doesn't exist. And I'll try to build on Choi's comments here, kind of thinking historically, then kind of offering some ideas on the present. So as a historian of U.S. international relations, primarily, I want to focus more on the United States, but along with Choi's comments, I'll talk about Germany and China as well. But really, I have two basic points that I would like to stress. One is historical in nature, and one is forward-looking. So the historical nature is, the historical point is that the US is not innocent in this crisis. And by this, I don't mean to deflect blame from Putin in particular, from Russian nationalism. Like, ultimately responsibility lies with decision makers in Moscow for what is happening. But I do want to call attention to us here in the United States, to how the United States has had lost opportunities and hypocrisies that are quite relevant to thinking about what's happening today. First, if we think about the legacy of the ending of the Cold War, so the first case I want to talk about is just a lack of creativity by US diplomats with the collapse of the Eastern European Communist Bloc and the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989, 1991. And here in particular, the question is relates to NATO expansion. And I'll pop in the chat a map of NATO expansion if you want to download it that way. I'll also share screens real quick so you can see a map of NATO expansion. But let's see. So this is so this map here is, it's not the greatest because you can see it sort of wipes off countries that aren't in NATO, like Russia, and Sweden and Finland. But what this map does do that's good is it gives us a sense of what NATO looked like at the end of the Cold War, with these kind of blue and dark red countries here, from Turkey through Italy, West Germany, Greece, Norway. And then you can see NATO expansion kind of beginning in 1990 with the eastern part of Germany, and then really taking off in the late 90s, continuing really into the present with North Macedonia joining just in 2020. So this is, of course, one of the major grievances that Putin has. Putin is not seen as a great historiographer, but he is kind of entering into a historiographic debate about whether the United States made a promise in 1990 not to expand east with NATO. The famous phrase that Putin and other apologists will like to cite is "not 1 inch." That is that Secretary of State James Baker promised that the US and NATO would not expand 1 inch beyond the Berlin Wall or the Iron Curtain. The general truth is it's a little murky. There was never a written agreement. There were some verbal discussions. So Putin's claim that there was a violated pledge or promise is a bit of an exaggeration, but it's not totally made up. At any rate, though, there were lots of people at the time who thought, well, let's get rid of NATO, because if we organize Europe around a system that has a mutual defense pact, and then people who aren't in that mutual defense pact, it's inevitably going to create tension and division and insecurity among people who aren't in this group. So NATO expansion had a very predictable effect, which was to increase Russian insecurity and increase Russian grievances. Now I say that, speaking personally, I've got family in Estonia, and that's where my stepfather was born. And so I'm grateful, and I know Estonians are grateful that there's the American nuclear umbrella protecting Estonian sovereignty. But there's a major cost, and I think Ukrainians are paying the cost of that right now. So what could have happened instead? What could the United States have done instead of pursuing NATO expansion? One idea, we can't go back now, but there was another organization that existed at the time, the OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. The OSCE is not a self-defense treaty organization, but it is a political, military, economic, social organization. And it had the great advantage when it was created in the 1970s of including the Soviet Union. And so this could have been a framework for a disband NATO, rethink European security with a more comprehensive framework. The OSCE did great work starting in the mid-70s with the Helsinki Accords, promoting human rights in Eastern Europe. So they had a track record of success. I think a creative American diplomacy could have come up with a more stable solution. So American policymakers were extremely creative after World War II. They did many great things in the mid to late 1940s, creating new institutions. We didn't create any new institutions that matter to solve the new framework at the end of the Cold War. So we're paying the price for that now. Not only are we not creating new institutions, we are actively undermining institutions that might be relevant for this. For instance, in my mind, not so proud feature of US foreign policy has been defiance of the International Criminal Court. The person who started this policy for us, so the presidency, this was Bill Clinton, was the first US president who had the ability to accept the International Criminal Court. He instead chose not to, basically arguing that US soldiers and US policymakers should never be held accountable outside the United States for their actions, for war crimes and the like. So this is ongoing. So you can begin to see a pattern. I mean, there's a pattern here where the United States might support international law in 2022 when it's convenient, but with this 25-year running campaign for the International Criminal Court, the U.S. is defying international law. You probably, if you're history majors, you know the U.S. we've invaded other countries as well. Panama 1989, Iraq 2003, we could go on with that. So the U.S. is setting up a world where international law can be seen as opportunistic, and where pledges to international law come across as hypocritical. And I'll get into how this complicates things a little later. Suffice to say, one last point, with nuclear weapons, the US had an opportunity to help bring about a reduction in nuclear weapons. The United States has not done that in its time at the end of the Cold War. So just two quick examples here in the chat from the Bush administration, the Trump administration. And all of these decisions create a situation, increase the danger of the situation we're in now, where Putin has put his nuclear forces on high alert. If the NATO members start intervening in some ways, providing intelligence support, cyber attacks, running in supplies, there's the chance of a nuclear crisis is all the greater. So the U.S., just to sum up, for these reasons, is not totally innocent in this. Even if this is not a war of their making, the U.S. didn't cause this, but the U.S. had options that could have prevented or mitigated some of the dangers here. So my second and final point is that the future is going to be difficult in part because of the past. So right now, because of nuclear weapons, because of mutually assured destruction, NATO countries are going to be extremely hesitant, and I'm glad they are, to get involved militarily in this conflict. So what we're left with then are sanctions. And sanctions are easy to get into in a crisis like this, but they're kind of hard to get out of. So it's the issue, right? There's a moment of shock last week, and Europeans, including Germans, broke with policies that had been favorable to imports of Russian gas and oil. So they're beginning to challenge that. So this is so sanctions, you can start sanctions. The problem though with sanctions is that we don't have a clear end game for them. Like we don't have clear conditions for when to remove sanctions. So if there's an awkward negotiated settlement where there's a kind of independent Ukraine, but parts of it get taken away, do we end the sanctions at that point? Or maybe the Germans, who are going to start freezing their butts off because they need to burn Putin gas, as some Germans call it. Germans might crack because they want their energy, they want their heating supply, and other countries might not. I think that another issue with sanctions is that we're not the only power in the world. So the US has taken advantage of the fact that the dollar is the world's leading currency. We've taken advantage of the power of the dollar to freeze Russian assets and to kick Russia out of the dominant global banking system. This is the so-called SWIFT system. So what's happening, about 7 years ago, China created its own alternative to the SWIFT system called CIPS. This is their version of an international banking system. And you can kind of imagine, if we freeze Russia out of the Western SWIFT system, where is Russia going to go for its banking? Probably to the CIPS system that the Chinese are creating. And maybe India will too, maybe other countries will as well. Because if you go through the Western banking system, that means you are using US dollars and you're basically at the mercy of the US government. So the US is playing this card right now, the SWIFT card, the sanctions card, but how long are we going to be able to keep this? And the more we play it, the more the rest of the world is going to want to get out of it. Get out of the system. So I'm not really optimistic about the future. I don't think there's any great situation here, but I do think that Americans can make a difference if we are prepared to make genuine sacrifices. Like if we're prepared to live with higher energy prices, Europeans need to be able to do the same. I didn't hear Biden make any call for sacrifice last night. If we're in a warlike situation and we want to use peaceful economic measures, we should still be ready to do what countries do in wartime if they want to make a difference, and that's make sacrifices. And that could just be something as simple as energy conservation. I didn't hear a single word last night from Biden about that. Will the United States be willing to give up its UN Security Council veto? We could maybe have a meaningful United Nations if we got rid of the Security Council veto. What if the US unilaterally got rid of the veto that it has and then convinced France and Britain, maybe even China to do the same? And then maybe Russia might be willing to do it. So we have to rethink our institutions. We can't just live with institutions we made in the 1940s. We have to create new institutions and new patterns. And maybe to go back to lithium, maybe we should start mining it in the Salton Sea. There's a lot of lithium there in the Salton Sea. It's going to screw up our tourism and our environment. But why should we only mine minerals from other parts of the world? Maybe we should pay a price there as well. All right, so let me stop here, and I'm really eager to hear what people have to say about Choi and Tim's talk and everyone else, all your thoughts and ideas.
Thank you, Dr. Endy. We're going to open up the floor to questions and comments. We can go past 4 o'clock. We have a whole nother hour to do this. So just let us know what we want to do, okay? Put your questions in chat, or you can just talk to, yes, Carlos, please.
Hi, well, this would be to Professor Choi. What do you think are some of the face-saving measures that Putin could take so that if he does engage in diplomatic relations again, he doesn't go back to Russia seeing as a weak man, because being a strong man is one of his main things keeping him in power?
Carlos, that's such a good question. And I wish someone had asked that question a few months before war started, right? Because he was massing the forces. It was clear to everyone, you don't mass 140,000 troops overnight, right? And the whole world, and Biden said, oh, he'll invade on Wednesday, but no one was doing anything, right? It was like watching a slow moving train wreck. And I think everyone wanted to just believe that this man was bluffing. And I think he was, but perhaps at that point, someone had said, let's talk. Maybe we wouldn't be in this mess. But right now, I think it's so toxic with the West because Putin seems to be obsessed with the West. And I know some of my Russian friends are very worried about Russia becoming a junior player in a Russo-Chinese relationship, right? And I mean, that's not a very wonderful future either. And so that's why I said China, maybe somebody who's certainly not neutral, but maybe somebody else can bring some sense back, because are we all ready for a nuclear war?
No.
Which Putin says he's ready for. I don't know, but I'm just looking at all the reactions, and Turkey really surprised me. China surprised me. India surprised me. So that's a really bad answer to your very good question, Carlos.
Any other questions? Or Afshin, Dr. Afshin, please, sorry. Yes. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, was it someone before me?
I don't think so. I might have, if there was, I apologize. I don't think so, though.
Okay, I just wanted to focus on what Dr. Endy said, and I agree with all of your points, and I think they're excellent. But you ended on a pessimistic note, and unfortunately, I have to share that with you because on none of these issues, on NATO, does a military pact like that have any meaning anymore? I mean, NATO was routed in Afghanistan even. So it's not only, it doesn't make sense to go on with that kind of military alliance. It doesn't make any sense to live in a world that could be blown up many times over by like a stupid man deciding, the leader of be it Putin or Trump or Biden or the president of India or Pakistan. But the problem is you don't see any movement, even a discussion at the level of getting the UN, for example, involved as a peacekeeping, real peacekeeping institution in the world. The kind of radical measures you mentioned, the US saying, I'm going to give up my veto and see what happens. Unfortunately, none of these are great. but they're not going to happen. And I think it's up to people, at least like us, to talk about them, because they're not talked in the media. They're not talked by the political establishment. And, so we live in this condition that someone like Putin can threaten the world that I might start a nuclear showdown, and he might, and it's a possibility. We're living in that kind of world. So I'm sorry, I don't think I had just like expressing frustration, and you so beautifully pointed to what the problems are, but one feels almost powerless. And I just want to end by saying that I tell my students that we live in this world, and most of us are not the ones who own most of its resources and riches. But even those who do don't seem to care. They don't seem to care that this nuclear midnight clock is ticking closer than ever to the nuclear midnight. And we all go down together, but they have more than anyone to lose. And yet it doesn't seem to be an issue to be dealt with seriously. Sorry, I'm just rambling on.
Shane, I think it's important though, and I had made a comment in like the Zoom chat that people are getting their information off TikTok about whether or not we can survive like a nuclear holocaust. I'm like, whoa, you guys, this is certainly something that needs to be discussed, I think, by historians and people that have lived experiences too. So I acknowledge your comments. I appreciate that. Was there any other questions or just comments and everything?
Yes, actually.
Yes, please. I was just reading chat too. So Dr. Endy, answer some questions in chat too that were directed.
Sure. And I think Ruby had a question in the chat.
Yes, Ruby did too. Ruby wanted to know, what was your opinion on reports of Putin having cancer or mental health problems because of the way he has been behaving? Dr. Choi or Dr. Endy, Dr. Painix, do you have any comments or opinion about that?
I've just what I know from the mass media here and various filtered intelligence reports and things like that. It seems like he has changed somewhat since the attack on the taking of Crimea and the war against Ukraine in 2014. Physically, mentally, I don't know, but he's become more strident in his adopting this 19th century version of Russian nationalism.
I think that's what Ruby was talking about. She had mentioned that in my class too. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Dr. Chatterjee, did you have anything to add to that? Because I remember that you had talked about how he was a KGB agent, how he was meticulous. He was not a war planner,
Well, one thing people have been saying that, as Tim said, that he's isolated himself from everybody. And this is, I think, for all of us to remember that diversity of opinions is key to mental health, or the ability to hear different points of view that challenge us. It seems like his circle is becoming narrower and narrower. And I'm just taking some hope from the fact that the Russian elite, I've never seen this display of courage. Since 1991 was the last time Russians acted so courageously in going against the regime. I'm hoping something is going to happen over there. And maybe the armed forces. I don't think the Russian soldiers are okay with bombing their compatriots. You guys must realize, Russians and Ukrainians, everyone has a Russian uncle or a Ukrainian aunt or a cousin.
I have both. Yes.
And the Ukrainian government has set up this website where Russians can find out information about the soldiers dying in Ukraine. So let's see. Let's see what happens.
Yobani had a question in chat. So did John, I think, also, and Albert. Albert asked, did the West not learn the cost of appeasement during World War II? That's my student right there. Like with Chamberlain's failed policy of appeasement. If anybody want to comment on that one? And then we have 2 questions by John and Yobani.
Yeah, I think we had a question also ahead of that by Henry.
Oh, sorry, Henry. Yeah, sorry.
But no, these are all great questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll say new institutions. Henry's asking like new institutions, like in the future we'll have factions. So what could new institutions accomplish? And I mean, I think if we're going to get serious about kind of international law, I think we have to have a real democracy between nation states. And, we can't have that with the UN Security Council where you have, the permanent members having a permanent veto, because what kind of democracy would ever exist where one senator could, that kind of describing our filibuster system. But no, what kind of democracy could we have though if we just very easily without a filibuster, one voice could say no, you can't do this. So the Security Council can only get involved against a small kind of marginal powers. And same thing, to be honest, with the International Criminal Court, because the US doesn't put any skin in the game. The only leaders who get put up before the International Criminal Court come from small countries that don't have big allies. So I think that, we have to have institutions that are going to be democratic, and that means you can handle diversity of opinion and still take action. Let's see, with Albert's question about appeasement in World War II, I don't know, sometimes like the appeasement metaphor with World War II kind of sometimes gets overused, because this idea that we should never appease dictators because look what happened when Britain and Europeans appeased Germany in the late 30s. This has led to many other bad situations. Saying we can never have another Chamberlain-style appeasement kind of encouraged the U.S. to fight in Vietnam, for instance. So we can abuse this metaphor. As well. I was reading reading about an interesting book, I should say. Reading articles about it. It just came out 2 months ago, but it's on history of economic sanctions. And the argument that this historian makes is that it was the fear of economic sanctions that led Hitler to his path of aggressiveness. The League of Nations set up a path towards a more peaceful world. So they're going to use economic sanctions, and then that could have unintended effects. Mainly, it led Germany and Japan to try to obtain as many resources as they could, including those in Ukraine, for Germany, so that they could survive economic sanctions. So I think we tend to simplify the lessons of World War II, and because I think there's many different directions we could go with this. So I'll stop here because we've got more questions.
No, thank you, Dr. Endy. I love the next question. Yeah.
I would love to know if Putin has a body double.
Yes. Can we get on that right now? I just need, yes. Timothy, that is all you right there, please. Let's speak on that.
No, that's some internet rumor, I think, that's floating around. But he does seem to have a puffy face. Maybe that's due to some steroids that he's taking. I don't know.
that made me laugh or anything in this situation. Carlos, I think, had his hand up. I just brought up the issue about colonialism, and of course, just honoring African students that are in that region too. But Carlos, did you have a question?
What was a question? Have comment?
Okay.
I know Professor Afshin was mentioning there's no optimism, and I was wondering if you think this would have a the sanctions on Russia and the killing of the Russian economy in such a quick fashion could have some effect on Chinese, and perhaps that is why the Chinese are so hesitant in making a decision as to what side to join, since it is possible for the West to apply the same type of harsh sanctions on China. So perhaps that would be a positive, as in de-escalating the aggressiveness of countries. Am I too off?
Well, Carlos, I think you've really raised something very important. How China behaves will determine the outcome. If China wants an independent Ukraine, then everything changes, right? Because the West has already used maximum economic power. They have nothing left to use. But if they can use the Chinese banking system and sell oil and gas to China, then the Russians are okay. So I think a lot is riding on China at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Chatterjee. Is there any final comments or concerns, or, Dr. Endy, Dr. Choi Chatterjee, or Dr. Panik, do you have anything that we could just end with, or just final thoughts? I wasn't sure. If we had any more concerns from the Zoom floor or questions, let me know.
Let's see, Yubani asked, why should we care? Like what happens in Europe? And I don't know, so all of you showed up, so you must care. So why? I mean, why are you here? You could be studying, you could be exercising, you could be sleeping. Why are you here?
Put your answer in chat. That's a good one.
Or
just talk, yeah.
yeah.
Don't be shy.
I want to know more. I
Yeah?
just want to know.
Yeah.
I'm curious to find out what's going on. And as a history major, everybody in my family is asking me, well, what's going on? You're taking a Soviet Union class right now, so what's going on? So, well, here I am trying to find out. And it's really edification, but also what we can pass on to others.
Yes, that's excellent, Daniel. Christopher wrote, the possibility of a nuclear war affects all of us. Absolutely. And as part of Generation X, yes, that is stressful for us right now because we've lived through this before. So yeah. Thank you, Viviana. She wants to be informed. Absolutely.
And Esmeralda said the importance of our democracy, right? And
Yes.
and that's very interesting in Ukraine, right? I mean, a large majority of Ukrainians do want even a flawed democracy that they have in Zelensky, than having Russia impose. They'd already picked out 2 oligarchs that they were going to install in Ukraine, Saryov or Medvedchuk. And so that is interesting. Some choice is better than no choice. A flawed democracy is better than a dictatorship.
Esmeralda, you had a question or a comment?
Yeah, I had a question. What are the repercussions of a no-fly zone? Because that's what the Ukrainians really want. So what are the repercussions of that?
So a no-fly zone means that you have to enforce that with other, with planes. You have to prevent Russian planes from flying over Ukrainian airspace. So that means you'd have to have like in a military standpoint, you'd have to have NATO air supremacy effectively. And to enforce it, you can declare a no-fly zone, but to enforce a no-fly zone, you have to have fighter jets to scare away Russian planes. So given nuclear weapons, and the fear of escalation, there's a real reason why NATO is hesitant to do a no-fly zone. And yeah, I'm kind of happy about that, not wanting to be vaporized by nuclear weapon.
Not today. It's just not going to happen this week. Okay, we've got things to do.
If it does, it'll be fast, right? It'll go quickly.
I'm ready for any of this. But no, I say that because people are joking about this, and it's just, we shouldn't be joking at all. So thank you, Dr. Andy. Julian had a question. How much do you think the media is contributing to the escalation of this conflict? Yes, Julian.
Yes, I agree that they are gaining from it, especially the 24-hour news stations. And that goes for the Russian side too. Although I think the Russian media, obviously state controlled. I don't know if you've read any of it, but just parroting Putin's views and, talking about the future of Ukraine, how it will be split up. Will some territory go to Romania or Poland, after it's dismembered? Those types of things, but just horrible. But still, with ours, it's sensationalism. We have to be careful. I mean, that's why we are here, right? To try to get beyond that. So, try to find a good media outlet to keep informed with, or a couple of them, rather than just, following the feed. That would be my answer to that.
Susanna, I saw you raise your hand.
Yeah, I was going to say, for the last 10 years, I've been watching and reading Russian media. So I come from Soviet Union with Russian education. So I've been following really closely what was going on. So for the past year, after US presidential elections, it was on many TV channels in Russia, which I'm watching on a regular basis. They were talking about upcoming aggression. All the politicians were encouraging Putin to start real war. It was there for a whole year. I've been listening and I was like, I can't believe, does anyone listen what they're talking about? they were talking about this for a year or more. I'm not even talking about before that, but as far as the aggression goes, like for the past year after Biden became a president, every single day, 4 to 5 hours on about 10 channels that were not just Putin's channel, they were like different channels. The politicians, historians were getting together and talking that they need to act because no one else is gonna act. They were, NATO, whatever, they are not gonna act, sanctions, we can handle all the sanctions. We were hungry for years. We can handle the hunger and everything, all the deprivations, and we gotta do it. And I heard so many influential politicians actually telling Putin, move, do something. Nobody's gonna do anything. You need to move, you need to start. So it was something that was coming. I don't know how everybody else wouldn't, react before it came. So, yeah.
Susanna, are you a history major or are you?
Yeah, I'm history major. I'm right now working on my master's.
Thank you for saying that.
This is my second year.
No, that's valuable insight. I just wanted to, make sure you introduced yourself too. So thank you for that. Absolutely. Ruby has a question. Is there specific news stations that don't sensationalize? Yeah, CNN sensationalized like Fox everything. So
I just want to say that Susanna is raising something really, really important. As I started my lecture saying a complete failure of the world to try and deal with it, and now pretending it's an emergency now. Putin has been saying exactly the same thing from 2003. And then after 2014, he's been really rabid on this point. And I don't know why nobody paid attention. And so, Susanna, I'm really glad you raised that. I don't think everybody understands this is not new for Russians. This is new for the rest of the world.
For the Western world, yeah, that doesn't pay attention. Absolutely. Jonathan has a question. Why didn't Putin invade the Ukraine during Trump's presidency when he may not have received the same type of pushback from the US? What prompted him to do this at this time, at this point in history? I'll turn that question over to the experts.
Jonathan,
I know. Thank you, Jonathan, for that question.
Hate to give Trump any credit, but he actually armed the Ukrainian army. He gave them some state-of-the-art weapons that was blocked under Obama. And they were trained very well. That's why they're fighting so well now.
John, did we forget your question? Let me go back. John Merritt had a question and everything. I want to make sure that we give him space too. Let me go back and chat. I apologize, John. Oh, how did the ideology, capitalism versus communism, motivate Russian expansionism now and then? That's John's question. If anybody would like to answer that.
Well, you could say that Russian capitalism is one of the purest forms of capitalism on earth. I mean, it's very concentrated in the hands of a few people. And of course, they make a lot of money through oil and gas sales. So I think that's given them a lot of confidence, in pursuing what they're doing. As far as the United States, I don't know, what would you say, Chris? Capitalism?
Well, I mean, I think it's basically material. I mean, I think this goes beyond ideology, where it's materialism, that it's cold in Europe in the winter and you will freeze to death if you don't have sources of heat. So, if you want to, so I think on some level, the language of thermal units doesn't have an ideology. And so ultimately, I think what gives Russia its power in this case is our carbon resources. So I think that matters. Probably, in my mind, that matters more. Because Europeans have a mixed economy, where they blend socialism and capitalism together. The United States has that too, just with a different blend. With less of the socialism. I could be wrong, but I don't see that as that's not my biggest analytical frame. Like this crisis has turned me into more of a materialist. I will say, I guess when it comes to capitalism, I mentioned this earlier with the banking system. The US, based on its position after World War II, ended up with the dollar as the leading source of trade in the world. So when Russians buy products from Germany, when Germans give Russians money for their gas, they're doing it sometimes in euros, but often in dollars. And so when we think about but what's emerging from this is that capitalism is really a state-led system, that the US government has its paws all over this capitalist market system. And I think that's one thing that's emerging with greater clarity in this crisis, is just how politicized the so-called free market economy is. And so I think that's something to watch out for. There's a political scientist who's called this weaponized interdependence. So in this market economy, we're all interdependent with each other, but that interdependence can be weaponized, in this case by the United States. So I think weaponized interdependence is a phrase we might be hearing more about.
Okay, thank you so much for that. We just want to end with Yobani's question. We're going to kind of close this out due to the recording limitations. I want to make sure that I can have this video up on our website, our YouTube later tonight. So Yobani asks, and we can end with this: what do you think about Putin's isolation and his decreasing circle of advisors? I thought Dr. Chatterjee had said something earlier. And do you think Putin is fighting a war of his deranged ideology? So we can kind of end with that.
I'm just going to say, I don't think Putin was expecting to fight this war, and maybe that will also end it.
Oh, thank you, Sean. Okay, well, we can come back to this. I wanted to host these dead hour dialogues throughout the semester. So I'm thinking in the next 2 weeks, we can have another dialogue about this. So save the date. Maybe Wednesday is a good date for all of us to meet, but this is an ever-changing landscape. And I would like to bring back, our experts in our department to continue this dialogue. Thumbs up or thumbs down on that idea. Let me see what you guys have to say about that before we go. I want to get some, some ideas and everything. Okay.
Thank you, Dawn, for organizing this. It's so kind of you.
No, I think my students had asked me, and my family is from Russia. We came over, and I'm not an expert, and I think I want my students to hear, from the experts on this topic. So I never have a problem hosting space for this. So stay tuned, you guys. In about 2 weeks, we'll come back and have another dialogue about this. Susanna, I would like to have you come back too. So just, keep an eye out. But I want to say a special thanks to Dr. Choi Chatterjee, Dr. Chris Endy, Dr. Timothy Panic, also Dr. Afshin Mateen, who was here, and Dr. Ping Yao, and Dr. Scott Wells, who joined us a little bit later. Okay, thank you guys so much for coming tonight. And we will see you guys in a couple weeks. All right. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Daisy. Bye, everybody. Have a great evening and stay safe. Thank you, Andrea. It's good to see you again. Thank you, Julian. It's good to see you. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much. Okay, so stop recording.